Very good morning to you all. Recently, I did a creation moment on evolutionary hoaxes or stories. I thought I'd go down that track, similar track this morning with this morning's creation moment, which I've entitled Creation Stories. We start with an opening scripture in Acts 17 verse 26, which says, "And God hath made of one blood all nations of men for to dwell on all the face of the earth, and hath determined the times before appointed, and the bounds of their habitation." In most Western countries, critics of discussing the biblical account of creation in public schools often retort that creation, deemed unscientific in their view, should not be taught in government schools due to separation of church and state concerns. They add that if the biblical creation account is taught, then other religious versions should be available to be taught in government schools as well. Now, this is an interesting, and it could even be an excellent idea for several reasons. First, it will help the students appreciate other cultures. Second, it will help them to realise that a chasm exists between all other creation accounts and the creation account taught in the Bible. As Vienna-born biblical scholar Alfred Edersheim, who converted to Christianity from Judaism, concluded from his lifetime study, it is scarcely possible to imagine a greater contrast than between the heathen accounts of the origin of all things and the scriptural narrative that is recorded in Genesis. And this can be confirmed in Will Durant's book, Our Oriental Heritage, which contains numerous pagan creation accounts. Other scholars also concluded that in comparison to all other ancient cosmogonies, the historical accuracy and scientific plausibility of Genesis is striking. The radical thinking of its inspired author Moses is clear when compared to the far-fetched myths of the Mesopotamian cultures that surrounded the Israelites. It especially stands in stark contrast to the science and philosophy Moses learned in Egypt's world-class educational institutions of that day when he was raised in Pharaoh's house. One scholar also notes that elements of many creation myths are, in several critical ways, very similar to those in Genesis. One example is that most pagan creation myths begin with producing order, or cosmos, out of disorder or chaos by intelligence, or in a few cases, by some other ordering force. One reason creation stories are universal is that people from every culture have wondered the same basic questions about life, such as where did the universe and the earth come from? Why do we humans exist? How do we get here on earth? What is the end purpose of life? These questions have given rise to a broad variety of myths about creation in an attempt to understand our place in the world. Other scholars wrote, "All nations and cultures share a common quest to understand where they came from. For this reason, each culture has forged its own creation myth or cosmogony to explain the origin of the universe, earth, and the human race." Records preserved from ancient times testify to the central role questions of origins play in establishing the identity and religious heritage of every nation. Once these core beliefs are disseminated throughout the populace, many of life's vital questions are answered in the context of this basic foundation. Now, accepting that many cultures around the world have legends about creation and the Great Flood handed down from generations in the distant past, I'll just relate one example of a lesser-known story which doesn't originate in the Middle East. The Wallam Olam is the story of creation and the history of the Delaware Indians. It predates the coming of white people or Christianity to North America. The Delaware creation legend reveals an all-powerful creator who began by creating an earth without dry land and the heavens, including the sun, moon and stars. After dividing the waters from the land, he made all living things, including the first mother. This world was full of joy and had no sorrow until the snake wrought wickedness. It concludes by saying that this all happened beyond the great ocean. The Delaware story of the flood begins with the world filled with evil because of the activity of the evil snake. While the Delaware legend blames the flood on the snake, a few were saved through the flood at an island called Dana, a name very similar to Noah. While the Wallamolan is not Genesis, the similarities with Genesis are too many and too exact to be accidental. Similar legends from all over the globe have the same or similar details that they too share with Genesis. This can only be explained by the fact that the Bible is accurate in describing how all cultures have shared this common history together. Although many similarities exist between Genesis creation account and others of the world's creation myths, numerous stark contrasts and exceptions also exist. For example, a theme of many mythologies in numerous and better known cultures, including those of Greece, Egypt and Mesopotamia, involves primeval water as the lone element that existed in the beginning. From this primeval water, everything else in the universe was created. The source of this idea may have been inspired from the history of the creation as recorded in the Bible. One exception is that the basic first element of Chinese cosmology was qi, or vapour, which was the life force that embodies the cosmic energy governing matter, time and space. This energy, according to Chinese mythic narratives, undergoes a transformation at the moment of creation, so that the nebulous element of vapour becomes differentiated into dual elements of male and female, yin and yang, hard or soft matter, and other binary elements. The fact is, as stated by one scholar, often opponents of the Christian faith assume that the biblical creation account is nothing more than yet another in a long line of such documents, in this case a Hebrew creation myth that sought to establish a preeminent place for Abraham's descendants. In fact, as described in the examples that we've looked at, this claim is incorrect. Most creation accounts are not only unscientific, but nonsensical, and in great contrast to the Genesis account, which makes no claims that anything created God, or that he achieved his position, since he is the only God and he pre-existed the creation. In other words, God is the originator of all things. And as Genesis 1:1 states, in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. Isaiah 44:6, I am the first and I am the last, and beside me there is no God. So thank you for listening.